As we had discussed earlier in the first video, the study of life includes a variety of things, and we looked at the first theme being that Earth is a home to an incredible diversity of living organisms. All organisms share specific characteristics. This will be our next unit to study is, our next unit that we will be looking at here is that all organisms share certain characteristics. Before we go into all these details, we have to remind ourselves that the actual definition of life is not simple. The actual definition of life is not that simple. Why is it not simple? The reason being is that the category of living things and non-living are constructed by humans. Categories 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 are categorized by humans. As we say, human is to error. So there is no perfection even when it comes to the classification of organisms. We are basically looking at organisms in terms of viruses. We look at organisms like viruses. We look at animals. And plants. Humans have been able to categorize or to classify organisms, but they have really failed to categorize if viruses are animals or they are plants, and they are in between. Because of this irregularity, it is very difficult for us to really define what life is. When we are looking at life, we will be looking at it being the basic unit of life. So the cell. So there is no way we can discuss about life without discussing about the cell, which is the basic unit of life. Basic unit of life. What I mean by basic unit of life, all life processes, all life processes, all life processes take place inside a cell. A single cell is able to eliminate waste. It is able also to it's able to generate energy or use energy. So the cell is able to generate or use energy. At the same time, this cell, which is the basic unit of life, can make up what we call an organism. So some organisms are just basically a single cell, but some organisms cannot be single cell, but they are made of many cells. Because they are made of many cells, we call them multicellular. We call them multicellular. meaning they have many cells. But if you look at them, you will discover that each group of cells, each group of cells is specialized. What I mean by it being specialized is that we have different cells carrying out specific functions. For example, the muscle cell, muscles will contract to help in movement, contract and relax. Will contract and relax. We might be having another set of muscles, another set of cells. In this case, your brain cells. Your brain cells. Or the central cells that make up the sensory nervous system. They interpret sensory signals. So they interpret sensory signals. So when we are looking at, so they will interpret signals from different types of the organisms. Together, all these cells make up a complete organism. All these cells make up a complete organism. We will be looking at three major themes here. The first one being the need for energy. So all organisms need energy. The second one is that all organisms respond to their environment. And the third one is that reproduction. We will be looking at reproduction and development. We will start with the first one. And in the first case, what do we mean when we say all organisms need energy? We are basically meaning here that without energy, then life is almost impossible. Without energy, life is impossible. All life processes require energy. I could not be here doing what I'm doing if I didn't have energy. I need energy in order to talk. I need energy in order to move. All organisms here need energy. Where do they get this energy? That should be our first question. Where do they get this energy? Do they get energy? So where do organisms get their energy? Organisms get their energy basically from the chemical compounds. They get their energy from chemical compounds. They get their energy from chemicals. What we mean by chemicals in this case, we are basically talking about the chemical substances which may include sugar being the main source of energy and so forth. So organisms will get their energy from chemicals. What is the importance of energy? What is the importance of energy? So when we are looking at energy, we need, all organisms, as we said, need energy. Energy, what is energy? What is energy? So energy is the ability to do work. Is the ability to do work. Energy is the ability to do work, or apart from being the ability to do work, we could also define energy as being a cause of change. Cause of change. You cannot move if you don't have energy. Organisms will need energy in order to move, in order for all their life processes to proceed and go on. Some organisms use energy for the environment. Some organisms. So where do these organisms get their energy from, or where do organisms get energy from? So one source of energy, or where organisms get energy from, is some organisms. Some organisms get energy. Some organisms get energy from chemicals in their environment. In their environment. Some bacteria, some autotrophic bacteria are able to use chemicals in the environment to make their own energy in a process called chemosynthesis. In a process called chemosynthesis. Plants, which are also producers, will make their energy by capture of sunlight energy. Capture of sunlight energy. By capture of sunlight energy, which they convert into chemical energy, chemical energy which will be able to be used to do work. Some organisms use energy from the environment, as we have said this, and some, like the plants and other bacteria, will make their own chemical energy through the process of photosynthesis. So through the process of photosynthesis and through the process of chemosynthesis, autotrophs are able to make food, are able to make chemicals which will, of course, generate energy. So they will store the energy in chemicals. From these chemicals, all the organisms will get energy. Some absorb energy from the sunlight as we said, and they use this. So what is the use of the energy? Use of energy. So all organisms depend on energy for their metabolic processes. For their metabolic processes. When we talk of metabolic processes, it may include respiration, it may include protein synthesis, that is making of protein. It may include excretion, which is the removal of waste. So all these processes, as you see them, they will need energy in order for them to take place. Imagine an organism if an organism will not have energy, then this organism is really in big trouble. This organism will be in big trouble. The next theme that we will be looking at will be theme number 2, which is the response to environment. So when we are looking at response to the environment, What are we talking about? Response. Response to environment. Think about it. Think about yourself. When you come out from a dark room, and you move towards light, and you move towards light. So when you move towards light or a source of light, then your eyes will not see good. Because of this, either you will raise your arm, raise your hand, you would raise your hand to shade yourself, from the sunlight, or maybe you will use shades. So this behavioral change is what we refer to as response. So this behavioral change is what we refer to as response. All organisms respond to changes. Respond to changes in their environment. If they are not able to respond, then they will not be able to survive. They will respond to changes in light. If light, there is change in light, for example, we take an example of plants. Plants will grow towards light. Towards light. This is a response. This is a response. So plants will always grow towards light. Plants will always grow towards light. Another good example is change in temperature. So when the temperature is very high, you would expect that if a room has a high temperature, then what will happen? What will happen is that we will respond by either putting on the AC or by moving out of the room and going out so that we can cool our bodies. We will take an example of alligators or reptiles. Reptiles move during the morning hours. During the morning hours, when the sun has just risen, they will move during the morning hours when the sun has risen to a source of light. So they will go to bask in the sunlight. So they will bask there to get the heat. When it is very hot, they will move away and they will go and hide. So they can hide either under a rock or they can hide inside a building and so forth. Organisms also respond to touch. Even touch can create commotion or can create response. So all these, what we are talking about, that is the light, temperature, and touch, all may be regarded to be stimuli. They are regarded to be stimuli. So organisms will always respond to stimuli, which are changes to their environment. The last theme and the final theme that we will be looking at here is reproduction and development. Reproduction and development. When we are looking at reproduction, we are basically talking about organisms being able to procreate, to produce other organisms. Other organisms. These other organisms should be of their own kind. They will produce organisms of their own kind. So during reproduction, the parent will pass his or her genetic material to the offspring. In this case, what we are talking about, or what are we calling the offspring? The offspring is basically the young one. So when an organism produces a young one, it passes its genetic material to the young one. The genetic material here is called the DNA. It's called the DNA, in full deoxyribonucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid. So deoxyribonucleic acid stores genetic information about an organism, and therefore for an organism has to succeed, to survive in this environment, then it has to be able to reproduce. If it's not able to reproduce, then it will not be able to survive. When we are looking at organisms in terms of reproduction, we can categorize them into two. One is single-celled organisms, and multicellular organisms. Multicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. So when we are looking at single-celled organisms and multicellular organisms, then what are we talking about here? We are talking about single-cell organism reproducing by cellular division. What do we mean by cellular division is basically that an organism will divide, or the cell divides into two. Cell divides into two. So you are having a single cell, then this single cell will produce two cells of the same type with the same genetic makeup. So these cells will be having the same genetic makeup. So they normally call them the clones. So same genetic makeup. Then we have the second part, which is the multicellular. A multicellular organism, on the other hand, as it is producing, it will have a combination. It will have a combination of genetic material. It will have a combination of genetic material. In the next unit, or in the next video, we will be looking at lesson number 2.